Hello my fellow working class heroes, good day. I am Carlo and welcome to Carlo Excels. In this episode, we'll talk about item analysis. Specifically, we'll talk about the Item Discrimination Index part of item analysis. In this video, we'll focus less on the calculation of the Item Discrimination Index and more on the meaning behind the Item Discrimination Index so that you'll properly understand how to interpret the quality of your test items based on the Item Discrimination Index. Before anything else, if you're new to this channel, hello, this is Carlo Excels, a channel that is dedicated to teaching my fellow teachers here in the Philippines Microsoft Excel. Occasionally, I also create additional lessons like this that will be helpful for my fellow teachers. Please like this video and share this video to your fellow teachers and drop a comment down below. It'll really help with the YouTube algorithm and help those who are searching for this to find this. Thank you. Oh, and by the way, this is the second video in this channel series on Item Analysis Explained. The previous video already tackled the Item Difficulty Index. If you haven't watched that video yet, I invite you to watch it first before proceeding with this video. The link to that video can be found in the descriptions down below. Now, we'll talk about the Item Discrimination Index. The best way to start with the discussion is to first review why we do assessments in the first place. Assessment, in essence, is a tool that we teachers use. In our case, we use this tool to gather evidence of student learning. This evidence is what we can then use to make the proper decisions regarding instructions. In other words, assessment is a means, not an end. After years of being a student and being a teacher, it's very easy to forget and it's very easy to have it the other way around. No, learning is not the means, with the exam and the grade being the end. We should always remember that assessment is the means and learning is the end. Now, we mentioned that assessment is a tool. Just like any other tool, assessments will be useless to us as a tool if they don't fulfill their purpose. I'm sure most of us have encountered a metal detector at least once. The purpose of this tool is to detect dangerous metal weapons and firearms carried by people. However, people carry all kinds of metals in their pockets, like keys or coins, which could be falsely flagged by the metal detector. This is why metal detectors, when acquired, have to be painstakingly configured, calibrated, and tested before they are deployed. In other words, these metal detectors have to be properly discriminating, meaning they have to be able to tell between a person carrying a firearm and the person carrying small innocent metal objects. If it's too sensitive, it will detect everything and it will become useless. If it's too lenient, it will detect nothing and it will become useless too. Every tool, especially measuring tools, needs to be discriminating at some point. A ruler should be able to discriminate between objects that are long or short. Scales should be able to discriminate between objects that are heavy or light. And if these tools fail to discriminate, then they're not useful to us. Assessments are tools of teachers. Like all other tools, they measure something too. Assessments are created to measure various aspects of instruction. Some assessments are designed to measure comprehension, some are designed to measure grammar, and some are designed to measure the absorption of subject material. An assessment that is designed to measure comprehension should be able to discriminate between students with good comprehension skills and students with not so good comprehension skills. An assessment that is designed to measure grammar should be able to discriminate between students with good grammar and students who need more help with their grammar. And an assessment designed to measure the student's absorption of the lesson should be able to discriminate between students who learned the lesson and students who didn't. And just like any other tool, if our assessment cannot discriminate, it's not useful to us. So that is what item discrimination analysis is. Item discrimination analysis refers to determining the ability of an item to differentiate among students based on how well they know the material being tested. Take note that when figuring out an assessment's ability to discriminate, we usually do not look at the assessment as a whole. Rather, we look at each item's ability to discriminate. We do this by giving the assessment to students first, and then looking at the data we can find in the results. The first step in item discrimination analysis is to separate the students into high groups and low groups. So first, you check the test, and then get the results of the students, and then arrange the students by their results on the test, from highest score to lowest score. If you line up the results of the test, meaning the total scores of students in a straight line, arranged from highest scores to lowest scores, you'll easily see the spectrum of students' ability or understanding as far as the whole test is concerned. Naturally, on one extreme side of the line, you have students with high scores on the test. it may be safe to assume that these are the students who have studied for this test and know the subject material that this test is measuring. And on the other extreme side of the line, you have students with low scores on the test. It may be safe to assume that these are the students who have not studied for this test and have not absorbed the subject material that this test is measuring. The problem is the middle part of the line. In the middle part of the line, you have students that may actually know the subject material and have studied, but maybe they just have poor test-taking skills or poor comprehension, so that even if they know the answer, they still got the question wrong. In the middle part of the line, you may also have students that actually do not know the subject material or have not studied, but maybe they just have very good test-taking skills, they're good at eliminating choices from multiple choice items, or they have good comprehension skills, so that even if they don't know the answers, they still got the questions correct. That is why, in the standard practice of item discrimination analysis, we remove the middle part to remove uncertainties. We only assess the extremes. We take just the students with the highest scores, which we'll call the high group, and the students with the lowest scores, which we'll call the low group. We'll then assess just them. That way, when we evaluate the discrimination of our items, we can assess it based on knowledge of the subject material and not based on comprehension or test-taking skills. Okay, how many students should be in the high group and how many students should be in the low group? The standard practice is 27% of the total number of students who took the test. The high group shall be the highest scoring 27% and the low group shall be the lowest scoring 27%. Also, please make sure that both groups have an equal number of students. Consider the example on the screen right now. Let's say that we have 100 students who took our test. 27% of 100 is, of course, 27. So we have 27 students in the high group and 27 students in the low group. Next, consider the illustration on the screen right now. Let's say that on a particular test item, all of the students in the high group got the answer right, and all of the students in the low group got it wrong. A situation like this is considered to be the most ideal. If the question is written correctly, then all of the students in the high group, meaning the students who showed up to class, did their duties, and studied their lessons, should be able to get the answer to the item. And again, if the question is written correctly, then all of the students in the low group, meaning the students who have not properly absorbed the lessons, should not be able to get the answer to the item. And so, this particular question can be considered as perfectly discriminating. It is perfectly discriminating because all the students in the high group were able to answer it, while all of the students in the low group were not able to answer it. Therefore, we can say that this particular question can perfectly separate students between those who learned the subject material and those who didn't. Consider this next illustration on the screen right now. Let's say that on this particular test item, most of the students in the high group got the answer right, while only some of the students in the low group got it right. This situation is not perfect, but this can still be considered a good question. Although it is not perfect, the question is still discriminating because most students in the high group and only some students in the low group were able to answer it. We can still say that this particular question can somehow separate students between those who learned the subject material and those who didn't. Consider this next illustration on the screen right now. Let's say that on this particular test item, many of the students in the high group got the answer right, and there is an equal number of students in the low group who got the answer right too. In a situation like this, there may be a problem with the question if both students from the high group and the low group can answer the question correctly. Think about it. A student who does not study and has not learned the lesson can still answer the question with an equal chance to somebody who actually studies and has learned the lessons. That shouldn't happen. This is an example of a question that is not discriminating. It does not have the ability to separate students between those who learned the subject material and those who didn't. And consider this next illustration on the screen right now. Let's say that on this particular test item, very few students in the high group got the answer right, and there are actually more students in the low group who got the answer right. Now think carefully about how strange this situation is. You ask a question on the test, and students who did not study are able to answer this question correctly, while students who studied are not able to answer the question correctly. Something is seriously wrong with the question if this is what happens. This is an example of a question that is not only not discriminating, but it in fact has bad discrimination. It does not have the ability to separate students between those who learned the subject material and those who didn't. In fact, it's separating students the wrong way. Okay, now that we've properly seen what a discriminating item is and how it is different from an item that is not discriminating or one that has bad discrimination, we have to ask the question, why does this happen? What are the major causes for an item to not discriminate or to have bad discrimination? The first and most obvious cause is this. If you don't teach the subject material properly, then the item will not have any ability to discriminate at all. If students have no idea at all about the subject material, then answering the test will be no better than guessing. A test question that relies on luck and guessing will obviously not be discriminating. But of course, we'll assume that as a teacher, you will teach the subject material properly. So what else can cause a test question to not be able to discriminate properly? The next obvious cause is this. If the test as a whole is too easy or too hard. Please remember that the separation of the students between the high group and the low group is based on the scores of the students. Obviously, a test will not be able to separate students by who learned the lessons or who didn't if the test is so easy that everyone is able to answer it correctly, or if the test is so hard that nobody is able to answer it correctly. Please note, of course, that just because a test is easy, it doesn't necessarily mean that the test is bad. Just because a test is difficult, it doesn't necessarily mean that the test is bad. It all depends on your goals when you wrote the test. If you specifically made the test to be easy or hard, and it turned out exactly the way you meant it, then that's okay. However, just note that once a test or an individual test item becomes too hard or too easy, its ability to discriminate goes down. The third cause for why your test question is not discriminating, and believe it or not, this is the most common reason, your test's answer key is wrong. Yes, this is the most common reason why test items have bad discrimination, because the answer key is wrong. Naturally, when your answer key is wrong answers will end up correct and correct answers will end up wrong. This also includes situations wherein the test's answer key insists that there should be only one possible correct answer. But in fact, if you look at the question, there are multiple possible correct answers to the question. So when your item analysis results show that a test question is not discriminating, your first instinct should be to check the item's answer key. And please note that errors in answer keys most commonly happen with multiple choice questions or true or false questions. So you should watch out for that. The next possible cause for why your test question is not discriminating is bad or misleading wording or grammar in the question, or quite possibly a question with multiple possible interpretations. Naturally, when people are confused as to what the question is asking for, the question is no longer discriminating between students who know or don't know the subject material. Instead, the question is discriminating between students who can or can't understand the question itself. The question is discriminating between students who can or can't read the mind of the teacher as to what the question means. So please make sure that your test questions are written correctly with no spelling or grammatical errors. Please make sure that your test questions are stated in a way that can only be interpreted and understood one way, the way it's meant to be interpreted and understood. Doing so will improve the test question's ability to discriminate students. And another possible cause for why your question is not discriminating is if the question tests an objective that is different from the rest of the questions on the test. Any item on the test should be consistent with the rest of the test in measuring learning goals and objectives. If any item on the test measures a learning goal or objective that is different from the objectives of the rest of the test, then you can expect that it will not be able to discriminate students properly. So, if you ask students to study a book for a test, then don't include some stupid far-off test question like who is the author of the book or how many pages are there in the book. If you tell the students that your test is going to be based on classroom discussions, then don't include some unrelated test questions like what is the full name of the teacher. If a writing activity is designed to measure grammatical ability, then don't include the student's handwriting in the way you grade your activity. Again, all items on a test should be consistent with the rest of the test in terms of measuring specific learning goals and objectives. Now, it's time to talk about the formula and the calculation process to determine item discrimination. It's time to talk about the Item Discrimination Index. But before we go there, some of you may be asking, why do we need to calculate the item discrimination index? Why can't we just continue simply counting the number of students who got the item correct versus the number of students who got the item wrong between the high group and the low group? There are actually many advantages when calculating the item discrimination index. By getting the item discrimination index, it'll be much easier for us to compare items. It'll be easier for us to determine which item is more discriminating or less discriminating compared to others. Also, calculating the item discrimination index is actually very easy to automate. Spreadsheet programs and statistical software allow us to quickly and easily obtain the item discrimination index of all of the items on the test. Years ago, calculating the item discrimination index of all of the items of a test was long and tiring, but doing it now is actually much easier and faster rather than calculating it manually. Also, speaking of automation, this channel has an all-in-one item analysis template that helps by calculating the internal consistency, item difficulty index, item discrimination index, and multiple choice distractor analysis. If you are interested in this free, easy-to-use tool, please check the descriptions down below where you will find a link to the video that talks about the Carlo Excels all-in-one item analysis template. Also, in that video, you will find the item analysis template available to download absolutely free, no strings attached. The formula for the item discrimination index can be seen on the screen right now. The formula is the total score of the students in the high group minus the total score of the students in the low group, which will be divided by the number of students in one of the groups times the quantity of the highest possible score of the item minus the lowest possible score of the item. The result of this calculation is the item discrimination index, a number between -1 and 1. And this calculation is to be done for each and every item on the test. Based on our discussion a while ago, an item is considered to be discriminating if the students in the high group are able to perform better than the students in the low group. Please look at the numerator of the formula, the part that says total score of the students in the high group minus the total score of the students in the low group. That part of the formula dictates the sign of the item discrimination index. If the high group has a better score than the low group, the item discrimination index will be positive. If the low group has a better score than the high group, the item discrimination index will be negative. Therefore, at a glance, you can already see that if the item discrimination index is positive, then the test item is discriminating. If the item discrimination index is 0 or negative, then the test item is not discriminating. Please note that the higher the result is, the more discriminating the item is. As far as the item discrimination index is concerned, the closer it is to 1, the better the item is. The closer the item discrimination is to -1, the worse the item is. The item discrimination index thresholds will depend on your own standards as a teacher and will depend on the nature of the test itself and the standards of your school. It will also depend on the author or professor you are listening to. But if I am to share what I was taught, I'd say that an item discrimination index of 0 or less means that the item is not discriminating. An item discrimination index greater than 0 to 0.4 means that the item has average discrimination. And an item discrimination index of greater than 0.4 means that the item is discriminating. Let's consider this example on the screen right now. You may pause the video if you want to take the time to perform the calculation yourself. This item is a dichotomous item with the highest possible score of 1 and the lowest possible score of 0. There are 27 students in each group. If you total the scores of everyone in the high group, the result will be 25. And if you total the scores of everyone in the low group, the result will be 3. After applying the formula, the item discrimination index for this test item is positive 0.8148. This indicates that this item is discriminating. Now, let's consider this example on the screen right now. You may pause the video if you want to take the time to perform the calculation yourself. This item is a non-dichotomous item with the highest possible score of 5 and the lowest possible score of 0. There are 27 students in each group. If you total the scores of everyone in the high group, the result will be 9. And if you total the scores of everyone in the low group, the result will be 38. After applying the formula, the item discrimination index for this test item is negative 0.2148. This indicates that this item is not discriminating. So as we are about to end our discussion on the item discrimination index, let me state that the next lesson will feature multiple choice distractor analysis. So please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss that lesson when it comes. So that's it for this lesson on the item discrimination index. I really hope I earned your subscription today. Once again, I am Carlo and this is Carlo Excels. Thank you very much for watching.